Steve, sorry we can't get your video integrated, but definitely
the Q&A pod works, so we're on that.
Yeah. We're there. So anybody else who's here, feel free to enter your question into the Q&A pod. If you are just joining, or if you are just Steve hanging out, I do want to welcome back somebody who you saw a lot this week in Careers in Media Technology, Hart Shafer. So Hart is an entrepreneur and product development coach, specializing in product discovery and validation. Hart actually taught me most of what I know about the customer discovery process and how to do problem interviews and customer interviews. And as well, he's taught a number of people at both Adobe and also Isotope. So a lot of the companies that we're talking about in the class. It's something, Hart. I mean, who taught you about customer discovery, and how did you get into this?
Well, I mean, as a longtime product manager, first, so I worked for Centrillion, who made Cool Edit Pro, and that's what Adobe bought and turned into Adobe Audition. So I've been working on software and technology, and primarily in the audio space, audio video, for most of my career. My latest entrepreneurial activities are sort of an aside to that technology path. And what I found was that we had some really successful releases and some not so successful releases. And in sort of the process of self-discovery and understanding, I was trying to figure out what was the difference and how could we do that. And it was, so I'd been doing a lot of reading, Lean Startup by Eric Ries and some other things. It was actually, though, when somebody recommended some of Steve Blank's writing, and he's the one who first coined the term, customer discovery and sort of that whole loop in 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And actually, Eric Ries was a student of Steve Blank's at Berkeley. And that's how they got connected. And it was Eric realizing that there was a great fit between that work that Steve Blank had been doing and then Agile software development. And it was reading is actually the introductory pages of the Startup Owner's Manual is what he calls it, which is not a great book to just read cover to cover. It's more like a textbook. But that introduction really hit home for me because I felt like right there on the pages was a huge percentage of what I had learned by throwing myself against a brick wall trying to get great products out into the world, and written out as this process that I had sort of come to myself. And so that started a lot of my research into this. And then actually I became a coach. I actually took a Stanford course, a 3-day seminar from Steve Blank and some of his team on lean methodologies and what he saw as what they call Lean Launchpad, which is the sort of academic version of Lean Startup, a 13-week curriculum. And so I was already doing some consulting in product management, and this really just rolled in naturally to what I wanted to do there, helping people actually figure out what's going to be a great thing to build. So, oh, and I think, Jay, you're muted. Okay. I do see that there is a question in the pod. How do my partnerships form? Well, the way I find clients is almost entirely word of mouth. Having been a product manager for a long time, what happens is that I do a lot of, so first it's word of mouth, either just an introduction from somebody else I worked with when they say, oh, well, this person really needs the kind of stuff that you do. I also do a lot of talks, especially at the local incubators and business meetings here, just sort of giving it away, like as much as I can help educate people in an hour-long talk or whatever that is, and that actually generates a lot of inquiries for me. And a lot of this actually came back because I started doing this specifically because I had done some general product management consulting where teams were asking me, could you help come in and just do this thing? And I would go and do a lot of this work. I would work with the team. I'd basically be a contract product manager, and I'd come back and I'd, with this whatever document and say, hey, this is what you should do as a company. And oftentimes it was, you should build this product, you should kill or consolidate these products, and whatever. It was the, the stuff that product managers do. But what I found was that as a contractor, I would finish that project. I would come back with whatever that report was, that recommendation for what they should do. They'd say, thank you, they'd pay me, and then they'd never do it. And I realized that a ton of that is that it's the ultimate not built here or not understood here. Like they would just assume that I hadn't quite gotten it, because it was a lot of what you discover in this sort of stuff is very counterintuitive when you're doing it regularly. And as somebody who's not in the organization, it was very difficult to get any traction within the organization to do the hard stuff, which is what product management almost always is. So I sort of bailed on contract product management a long time ago in general. And then it was when I decided to sort of concentrate back in this early stage. A company has an idea, or they already have something in market, and they want to figure out what they're doing next. Really working on just the validation piece. And the analogy I use is that most consultants are mountain climbers. You go out and you hire somebody to go do this thing for you. I need this paper written. I need this thing researched. I need, whatever, something built. And so let's say we need the view from the top of the mountain. Well, as a business owner or an executive, I might be able to climb mountains, whatever. I can do a lot of stuff, but a dedicated mountain climber can climb a lot faster. And then there's also the division of labor where I can, I don't know, build a house or something while that consultant is climbing the mountain for me. Mm-hmm. The problem is that when you're talking about product stuff, when you're talking about the core of a business and what you should build and how you should do it, no picture or painting from the top of the mountain is going to be believed. And so the person who can actually make the hard decisions has to climb the mountain. And so I liken my job now as more of a Sherpa. And so I can help people get up the mountain and get that view. But I can't just go get the view myself, because it's not going to be believed. It's not going to be acted upon. And that actually limits the people that I would work with. A lot of folks want to just hire and say, well, just tell us the answer and come back. And I actually don't take those engagements because I just don't think it works.
And so something I wanted to touch on that you'd mentioned when we were doing the interviews is, you talked about starting out and how you had fluency in tech and fluency in English. And, those kind of become good pairings for a product manager. You also talked a lot about some of the soft skills required. And so one of the things that came up from several students was, how can they show that they have the soft skills necessary as a product manager? Maybe they have the coursework down, but in an interview with you or with a company, how does that come across?
Well, you mean if somebody's looking to get into product management out of school?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say that the first thing is that I know very few product managers who got into product management out of school, unless they were graduating with a business degree specifically. Most of the time what happens is that people join the team in another role and then prove through both their domain expertise and whatever they're doing by taking on more responsibilities that they do have those soft skills. It's the kind of thing that's difficult to point to unless you have a specific example of having done it before. I think the best examples of that in a non-business environment are really running any kind of club, anything where what you're doing is bringing people together to take action when you're not the boss. Like, you can't just tell people to do something, because that's the reality of product management almost everywhere, is that ultimately you're responsible for what needs to be built. You're responsible for motivating and getting the team to all march to the same beat and go in the same direction. But nobody on the team actually reports to you. And so anything that you can show where you've been doing that kind of thing, where you've been able to build a consensus, you've been able to get people to support you, or bring people with disparate ideas together and get it all hashed out so that people can, even if they disagree, they can still commit. And that's where you need to be able to tell the story. And I think that there are places that you can do that in an academic setting, but typically not as part of the classroom environment.
Mm-hmm. So, another thing that comes up a lot in academic settings for some of the courses that are taught on this very campus is actually, it's starting out with a huge corpus of market research. So if you are looking, maybe to design the next iteration of a product, how much do you rely on market research versus going out and talking to customers on your own?
Well, it depends on what you're looking to do, and I think they play together, and so it's not an either or question. If you're looking at iterating a current existing product, then you'll know a lot more about the business, and using the market research can tell you things like, is this market growing? Is this worth actually doing? What kinds of people aren't using it? The way I look at it is that first and foremost, you have to know what problems you're solving or what gains you're creating for somebody. And if you just say, there are people who have, I don't know, who feel this way, it's too vague. What you're looking for is, Jay is an example of a person who has these problems. And we talked to 1,000 people, and probably not that many, but right, we did this research. We talked to a bunch of people who are like Jay. We realized this is what was going on. We ran these other experiments that showed us that Jay would actually engage with his value proposition. And now once we know that, I might, and it's not like it's linear, because at the same time I might be saying, okay, well, if this even pans out, is the market that Jay and Jay's cohort represents large enough for us to care about? Is this a big enough problem? Are we going to be able to build a business that matters? Or is this something where we're going to build a product that has a total addressable market of 6 people? Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, sometimes is still okay. If those 6 people are the CTOs for 6 major broadcasters, hey, that could be a great business, but it's a very different kind of business than building a turnkey product that you're going to sell to folks. And so I really see them as hand in hand, right? You've got the individual research about what people are going through, and you've got the market research, which is, if we can solve this problem, can we actually build a business about it? And are these people addressable? Are they somewhere that we can actually get to them, and be able to tell them that our thing even exists? Because there are plenty of products that come out on a market that are kind of awesome, but never go anywhere because the people they're trying to reach are, there may be a lot of them, but they're very diffuse, and the market hasn't been created yet. Unlike if I came out with a new fishing rod, everybody who likes to fish, I know places where I can go with that, right? But if you've got something which is, hey, it's like everybody who likes to wear white, I don't know, I mean, something random, mm-hmm. It's very difficult to know how you're actually going to find and reach those people. And so that's another place where that market research really comes in.
Awesome. And it's a good observation as well, that you can, if you are comfortable with the size of your market, there are, in post-production and broadcast, you really do have smaller markets. It's an enterprise software market. So you have a smaller set of customers that you need to listen to.
Right.
It's something that I've seen. Have you actually, what are your thoughts on customer development kind of turning into sales, like being a way of qualifying a lead? Right. Or
yeah, it's I like to keep them myself totally distinct, and the reason is, at least at the beginning, because the reason is that if you're thinking about selling at all when you're doing this customer development work, especially in the early stage customer discovery process, it's really easy to get false positives in your discovery because you've sold them, right? And unless your business model indicates you personally going out and pitching this idea to people and taking their checks, then it's not a very good way to validate whether or not this is actually a good product. And I think that's one of the things that typically happens, is that we go out and we love our idea, and so we convince people that our idea is great. Mm-hmm. That doesn't actually help us, because if we're there in person and we're actually saying this idea is great and we're overcoming their objections, we have no idea whether or not that will actually scale as we try to reach out. That said, as you finish the customer development process, a lot of what you get, especially in those first, the customer discovery and then the customer validation, where you're looking at the product possible solution itself, you're going to hear the justifications and objections to your potential solution right from the customer's mouth. And so you will absolutely use that as the way, or you should, as the way you talk about your future solution. And also, a lot of those people that you worked with and ran the experiments with, interviewed, and so on, they can absolutely be a major part of your early lead sources. It's the key is making sure that when you're actually doing discovery, you're not thinking about it as sales at all, right? You're not going to sell anybody. You're just out there. In fact, a lot of times in the interviews, you want to kind of anti-sell at some point. Like you've already told them what you're, especially when you get to the point with a solution, you might say, well, this is the potential solution. What is your feedback, right? You're through that. And then explicitly say, like, these are some of the limitations. These are some of the things that you might think it does, but it won't. Or these are some of the things that you might think it's good for, but it won't actually be good for, right? And see, does that actually matter, right? And when you're in the sales process, you're not going to do that. But early on, you may, and it's often a good idea to actually have part of your interview be sort of that anti-sale.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I remember this was some advice that you gave me way back when was to not actually go back to the same, let's say I'm going to, Bob, Jim, and Joe, and they're each guitarists, and I'm talking to them about the problems they have. That as I've learned from them, I might not want to keep coming back to them with my solutions.
Right. Well, it's every time you reveal the next thing about what you're thinking, you've spoiled that person for thinking about anything before that. And so you could go back to Bob, Jim, and Joe several times and ask them about their problems. But once you've gone back and talked about your solution, your potential solution at all, you've spoiled them to ever talk about their problems in general, because now they'll be anchored to just talk about the problems that were related to your potential solution. And you're also spoiled for talking to them about any other possible solutions to that same problem, because their head will automatically go back to what you talked about before. And so it's one of the things where when you look at your research, you always want to be talking about them and their work generally first. Then you want to be talking about, to get a sense of their workflow and what they do and who they are, not just demographics, but how they actually work. And then their challenges, because asking about specific challenges or talking about challenges will influence their general report on what they do. And then only after you've really talked about what's awesome and what sucks about what they do right now do you say, well, we were thinking about building this thing that might, do this. And now you can't talk about either the challenges or their general workflow, because now they'll be thinking about your solution, and so on down the line. As an example, price is the last thing you ever can talk to somebody about, because once you talk about a price, now everything else that you've talked about becomes incredibly concrete, and they've also anchored themselves to what they expect something of that value to do and to be, and so on. And so that's the sort of bits. I think it's a fine thing. If you had a set of people that you went out and interviewed just about the problem interview, as we call it, and then went back and said, okay, now I'm going to come back 6 weeks later and say, well, we've talked to a whole lot of people, and this is what we heard. Right. So first validate that you actually heard correctly, and then start testing your solution with them. That can often work just fine.
Awesome. So Chuck over at Stanford writes in. So you mentioned some of the great skills that a PM has are a natural tendency towards synthesis, being highly empathetic, relatable, and constantly curious. That's right. How do you develop those skills?
I think so one of the main things is just recognizing that that's what you need to do. As an example, towards the synthesis, it's very easy for everybody to say, and it's the natural tendency, especially of people who have a technical background, to focus on the technical aspects of the solution. And I really think it's the combination of I think you had the quote in there that I said about the 2-year-old, asking why a bunch of times. And that's right up there with the other piece that I lean on a lot, which is not the technical mind, but the scientific mind. And the scientific mind is, this is what I think is true. Why do I think that? The self-analysis of why do I think that's the truth, and how do I know that? And is there a way that I can find out whether or not that's actually true? And that's what, Blank is talking about in the customer development, and Reese in Lean Startup, and all of the work that's come after that. And then I think part of that, at least for me, led a lot naturally towards the empathetic part, which is that you're going to ask yourself questions about why this works or doesn't work. And what you really need to do is put yourself in the place where you can say, Well, what is somebody who's going through this, what's their experience that's very unlike my experience? And this is the place where I think that a lot of the super niche products, especially in the media industry, come from, where somebody's solving a problem for themselves but hasn't taken that step back to sort of understand the experience that people have with something, with something else. As far as the curiosity, I think that either you have curiosity and you're going to go out and you're going to learn anything you can about everything, or you don't. And I think that is probably developable, but it's about habits, right? And building that muscle. And when you see a fact, think, oh, that's interesting, and actually go read the Wikipedia article. And then the Wikipedia article is only a summary. So you click the link and you actually see where the source was and find out whether you believe that. And then you, all of a sudden, before you know it, you've learned about, whether or not there's actually life on a comet, or that's likely, because that's what I was doing last night. And it's unrelated to what I do, but just being curious about those things and really drilling in and trying to follow up on those things. As I think that's the big thing is trying to do that. And then there are other, I would leave it for a lot of other things. I think that there are some aspects of building empathy that are very doable. And I actually think that it's, just awareness, meditation is a, the mindfulness practice is a very useful thing for that in a practical sense. So anyway, that's just, some tips.
Awesome. Good illuminations in there. So, another thing that has been a practice that, we've been using in teaching the course, and I've been seeing more and more with other companies, is, maybe going out, doing some customer discovery, but then the most lightweight way of trying to see if a customer is truly interested is putting out a fake landing page. Mm-hmm. That's something that I think you have some experience with as well. Can you talk about the use of a landing page, or kind of testing out the sale?
Sure. Yeah, and this is after you have a pretty good concept of what you think you're going to build, a landing page can help you test the whether or not you can communicate the value proposition in such a way that somebody will actually engage with it in just a website. And so the idea is you build a website for a product that doesn't necessarily exist yet, and you have some kind of call to action for that. So it could be signing up for the beta. You could have a buy button that takes you to a page that you can't actually check out on. But the idea is, does somebody actually take action and give something valuable of their own? And that's why the email address is kind of interesting, because if it's a random website from a company you don't know, most people don't like to give them their email address, right? And so you might ask for that as a proxy for sale. And I actually did this with TheraSpecs, with my own company, where I had made some prototypes and I had tested them out, and people who actually tried them on in the target market gave great feedback and were really engaged and indicated a willingness to buy. In fact, we had several people who were willing to buy sort of in that coffee shop moment. But what I didn't know was, did somebody actually have to try on the glasses to know whether or not they would buy? And so I set up a single one-page website. It had a picture of a model who's happened to be my wife wearing the TheraSpecs, a paragraph of text saying what they did and what they were, and some bullet points, a couple quotes from the people that actually had tried them out. So there were real, actual user quotes. Like, I never do anything which is actually you can't follow up on or is a lie, right? Don't make up stuff that's not true. And then what I did is I had a big buy button next to the price, and when they clicked the button, it said, "Hey, thanks for your interest. We actually, we're actually just finishing up production, or we'd like to be in our beta or get an early version, give you your email address." Mm-hmm. And so I had two tests. One was, would they click the buy button, like start that cart process? And the second was, after they found out they weren't available, would they give me their email address? Like, how motivated were they? And that was, the response rate was enough. And I spent some money on Google AdWords to drive appropriate traffic there. And the response rate was high enough that I realized that people would see the value proposition and engage with it, and actually at least be a strong consideration for purchase. And I want to say that's just one kind of experiment type. but that's sort of the idea is getting that sort of MVP. One of my other favorites is what I learned is the concierge MVP, but my favorite way to say it is the Wizard of Oz MVP, because there's a man behind the curtain, as it were. And a good example of that is Coinstar. Did I do that? Did they see that example in the videos?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So the idea, like, it's literally a man in the box putting the money out the slot. And it's one of the things where, depending on your product idea, you can get amazing validation for the engagement and whether or not somebody will find value in it long before you've spent the resources to build it, because actually building it is the most expensive way to find out whether it's a good thing to build.
And it's something where, as a lot of students on campus are able to build a low fidelity prototype while they're here, and
Right.
it's probably a good practice to get into, to build
Yeah,
a low fidelity prototype, get out there and collect some data.
Well, and it's amazing what you can do with some sketches on a piece of paper, and like they just hit their button on the paper prototype, which is like they put their finger on something and you just like find the right page and put it down in front of them and see how they navigate and what they were expecting. I mean, that's talking about low fidelity.
Yeah.
I actually have a slide that I've used in several talks, which is the last one to code loses. And I gave that at a tech summit for Adobe, and I actually thought that the engineering audience was going to hiss at me. But the truth is that once you start to actually build anything, even if you think of it as throwaway, it's hard to actually throw away, right? Our minds get attached to it. And so low fidelity, cheap, fast, that's the way to go for as long as you can manage it.
Mm-hmm. So with the example of putting up a landing page using some Google Analytics to track, you're looking at data. So I'm switching to a question from Steve, mentioning is there any room for a product deviation to deviate from the scientific method? The hunt for a testing of a hypothesis using empirical data, and the role of personal experience superseding it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the things to be clear about is that when we're talking about, first of all, when we're talking about all these methods, it's not really the scientific method. We can't actually get the level of rigor in our data that a scientist can through peer review and aggressive challenging, right? All we can do is be inspired by it and aspire to it. But none of that removes any of the intuition, inspiration, spark of ideas that come while you're working on it. These things will not tell you what the solution should be. And so personal experience, intuition, and that ability to have that spark and realize that there's an awesome way to solve a whole bunch of these problems in one product or so on it's not just can be or supersede, it's a necessary part of the whole process. There are cases where people have gone and done a bunch of interviews and said, these experiments don't match what I think is true, and so screw it. I'm going to do what I think is true anyway, and been a great success. And so you can't say that can never supersede. The issue is that in my experience and the experience of many of the entrepreneurs and product people I've worked with, you're talking about 1,000 to 1 odds at that point. And what we don't see are all the two guys in a garage that never win anywhere, right? And so we have this amazing selection bias in front of us for building something that people, that we think that people are going to want, even though we can't test what they want yet. And the last thing I'll say on that is that oftentimes the excuse for not doing this kind of work is they can't conceive of the solution until they see it. And that may be true in some cases, but in 15 plus years of doing product management, and especially in this consulting that I've done for dozens of companies, not once have we not been able to figure out a way to run tests before we actually build the thing. And that's everywhere from interviews, which you can always do, all the way up to whether it's a paper prototype or something, and be able to determine whether there's positive signal. So anyway, just intuition and inspiration are still critical components to being a great product person. And by the way, that goes back to one of the other things I talk about in product management, is that a lot of people think about, hey, I want to be a product manager because I want to build my ideas. Mm-hmm. And if that's why you want to be a product manager, it's probably not a great choice for you, because While many of the ideas in the products I manage were mine, that's a minority, right? The product manager is much more, is an artist, but is more the curator of the museum exhibit, figuring out which pieces of art go in the exhibit and don't, and where they hang relative to each other. But they're getting these ideas from everybody around them and every source possible, testing them, guiding that, and then figuring out how they all go together. But it's not about, or it shouldn't be about, I'm building this thing that is for me and I really want. Again, that's a great starting place, but not a great end place.
Yeah, and there's a certain I feel like maturity is a good way of describing it, where just over time the good product managers and the good engineers are able to kind of take their ideas, contribute them, but then realize that if the business finds them valuable, fantastic. If the customer agrees with their feedback, awesome. But it doesn't have to be entirely driven by what you think you should be doing all the time.
Right, absolutely.
As a little anecdote I heard in talking to several senior software architects about, all right, well, what's the difference in your company between a junior software engineer and a senior software engineer? And the most common response is, oh, it has nothing to do with technical ability. In our company, it's when the senior software engineer is a junior software engineer who realizes that the customer exists. Like, it realizes the need of developing tools and features that a customer will use. Awesome. Well, we've got one more question as we come to our closing minutes of a very eventful first face-to-face hangout. Chuck rounds it out with being curious about the idea of a product manager as a curator and a catalyst versus a boss or a visionary. Can you talk more to that, Hart? And if the PM isn't actually the boss, how do you keep everybody on track?
Right. Well, typically, so it depends on what the company structure is, but typically everybody knows that they have, their responsibilities to execute. So the engineering manager and the engineering team and so on. And so actually getting work done is, in my experience, rarely the issue, right? You're not the one saying basically with the implied or you're fired after the sentences that you say, but people are trying to get the work done. Testers are testing, engineers are building, your program manager is keeping stuff on track, your designer, whatever that is. So there are a couple things about, since you're not the boss and you're trying to be a catalyst, as you say, or moving people along in the direction. And the first is inspiring them, right? Actually making them understand that the problems you're solving matter and that they can be solved, and that what's going on is very is important, right? And what we find is that people tend to stay motivated. And Dan Pink wrote Drive, which is a great book, pop psychology book on what motivates people. And they tend to stay motivated if they've got autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so autonomy, they can do their work the way they want to, within limits, but basically they can self-direct in some way. This is one of the reasons that a lot of smart people like to be in software, because typically an engineer is not told exactly how to solve a problem, just that the problem needs to be solved and they get to go solve it. Same with a lot of the roles in technology. Mastery, you're able to continually get better at your job. Again, this is one of the reasons why many software engineers and other software people love their jobs, because it gives you an opportunity to continually improve what you do through practice. But the last one is purpose, right? Why? Why this and not that? Why am I here and not there? In the media world, a lot of people have a lot of purpose in their own work anyway, because they've shown up and they decided to work for this media technology company rather than a bank, because they feel strongly about the kind of work they're doing. So what the product manager can do, and the most important thing, is putting in the purpose around this particular thing that we need to do. Like, why do we need to do this? And the word why, I think, is the critical bit there. I could recommend Simon Sinek. wrote a book called Start With Why. I don't recommend the book. It's very, I mean, the book's great, but it's one of those business books that after you get about a third of the way through, it feels like it's repetitive. But he did a TED Talk. So Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, Start With Why. And the idea there is that most companies, every company knows what they do. You know, we build audio recordings and editing software. Some companies really know how they do it. Like Toyota is a great example of that. The Toyota way, how they build cars, it defines Toyota. But very few companies know why. And why is not money, because why the money is the result of it. But why this and not that? As a product manager, one of the things that you can do is just help everybody understand why, right? Really understand the customer, everything you and the team has learned while you're doing this discovery process, the pain they have, the vision for the results. Like once this thing is in the world, look how much better art will be, or how much better music will sound, or how much, right? And this person's job, this person's life will be so much better connecting it to that real human element. And what I found is that in teams, except for, you know, sometimes you get a clunker of a teammate or something, but that's a separate issue. Really connecting back to that core vision about why is critical, right?
Absolutely. Awesome. Hart, thank you so much. This has been an eventful and also elucidating time. And you know, I hope you'd consider joining us as the students have more questions in future weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to as they do. So if anybody does have any questions, just let me know, Jay.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and have a good rest of your day, Hart.
Thanks, Jay. Absolutely. You too.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you back on Cadenza in the forums.